like the scissors of
Generic
corruption and
text.
whatnot, but yeah. Yeah,
Cool.
like my point, it's a really good book, but my point is that they did learn their lesson, and that's why they're doing it.
Yes, to some degree,
They
yeah.
they learned the wrong lesson.
Yes, that can be it. I mean, there's multiple things going on. But what's one of the probably most interesting things in media effects, because you get to see how quickly things escalate, like what kinds of things get spun up. Like in World War I, we talked about, assassinations. World War II is really built off of that kind of stuff. And it's like, how many times has there been someone who's high profile had something bad happen to them that people try to use to galvanize the whole thing? And it's like you start running into some issues there.
Remember the Maine, to death with Spain.
Yeah, well, it's if I were talking about stuff that's happened where information gets spread a lot more widely than what it really should. See, I think that will give you a good image, and if we share anything on the screen, I'll put it up there. If you pop in. I didn't send that email to him about the Zoom stuff till like 2 this morning, so I personally it's been in this class. But I said here in Oklahoma. Well, actually, before we go to the Oklahoma thing, I said self-immolation. We mentioned that one last time.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah, that sergeant's on fire.
Yeah, and so what was his justification for doing so?
He was not that he was cold. That it was it.
I do like that. He was cold. No, it was
that the Palestinians were shot and they were cold.
Yeah, and so it's you've got some issues with there's some elements of that just draw people's attention, and with that you have those who are looking to capitalize off of people's attention.
Yeah.
Similarly, certain stories take off.
Yeah.
Why? There's all kinds of questions. As I said, immolation was pretty straightforward. There was one where it was there's a whole bunch of issues. This is here in the state. There was
I think there's always a whole bunch.
yeah, well, it was the primary issue I went wide was because if you're dealing with someone who was, I think, transgender, their interactions and hostilities that they've encountered, and there's some back and forth and who was aggressive at what times. A person had negative interactions with people, ends up committing suicide as a result of all of those negative interactions and all other issues, and it ended up being a national story that a whole bunch of misinformation being shared about.
Yeah, that's why. I knew that most of the stuff I think I was thinking maybe I should read about this. Then I realized whatever I read is probably going to be false anyways. So why bother?
Well, how you do that is you look at multiple sources and see what lines up, and that's pretty straightforward. It's like how quick information is to get out there. Always be careful when you get something brand new or something fresh. Is how much of it's real, how much of it isn't, how much of it's miscommunication. To give you an idea for how quick some of those stories take off, take something like it's high profile like that, or Israel stuff, or like something where society's already key to be sensitive to it. Use of force is one. That's why we're talking about this now. You'll see that if something goes wrong, how fast everything moves for it. It is unbelievable. To give you an example, this one crosses policing and that issue and force. Had an instance where there was a shooting on campus, one of my last campuses I was on, and this is working there.
Wait, well, I thought that was Little Rock, and daily
It is.
shootings were a daily basis.
They are, but not on the campus itself.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
right?
misunderstood what you were saying.
Yeah, and so
about
most people-
Little Rock and the state of ignorance it was in.
No, there is definitely an element of violence, and you get that in the South. The research labs would show you. It's like it's just part of being in the South, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I love it.
I do, and that's when we start talking about use of force, you'll see why it's so important. But what was really cool was what ended up happening was it wasn't like the thing that everybody hears, the mass shooter kind of thing. What ended up happening was there was a student who decided they wanted to acquire illegal drugs. And so they knew they were dealing with a dangerous person, so they thought if they brought them on campus, they'd be less likely to get shot. Doesn't work like that. That's not that math, but they were at least trying. So, hey, they're using their brains. At least that's some hope for the future. Maybe. I don't know. They survived.
Pride save, bro.
Yeah, they survived. They got shot in the stomach. Right. And so people were walking by as this person laying on the ground groaning. So that person was on the ground for a wild shot before someone realizes exactly what's going on because no one's really paying attention.
Are you sure that they weren't the ones on drugs?
Oh, they were definitely on drugs too, but there were a lot of, both of those parties were on drugs, the shooter and the recipient of said bullet.
Bystanders is like, how do you miss something like that? Like,
Okay.
ow, I've been shot, like blood.
Okay, how many times do people pass by, homeless people who are groaning on the ground? Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, there you go.
I
Yeah,
I
well, it's-
underestimated the amount of blood.
Yeah, well, so gas shots, he was bleeding in time, yeah, kind of thing. And that's probably what's going on there. I don't remember the blood aspect of it. I just remember there were multiple people that walked by because they didn't hear the gunshot. They didn't see the guy get kicked out of the vehicle. They just see dude laying on the ground groaning and rolling around. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna avoid that. That kind of thing.
Yeah,
So-
yeah.
Let me finish this with time and then you'll see what I mean. Okay, so a few minutes elapsed before we even realized that this person has been shot on campus. As soon as we do, a phone call goes to our emergency services, campus police kind of thing.
Oh, no.
Okay, that's when the time starts ticking. Like there's your response time. Starts ticking from there. We had less than a 5-minute response to an active shooter. Guess how fast people in New York, the national news, were calling? 3. They were calling before most people in the police department themselves knew what was going on. That's how behind that stuff is. And so what you start seeing is there's some influence and some force being applied to that on an abstract level. We're not here to deal with that. We're here to deal with force itself. And so force is a very, very, very nuanced thing that you always need to be mindful of, whether it's when I was talking about citizenry, like that, talk about the force. That's actually from a movie. I think you actually referenced it, Starship Troopers. It's very, very, very good. What it is, he's drawing off of a lot of war movies where they've done similar arguments. And it's the same principles that they're espousing and what has the impact that it does.
I don't think yeah, the Starship, I don't think you really, yeah, Starship Troopers, the movie is a more or less a satire of a book that the director didn't even,
That's
barely
true.
even read.
That's true. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about in one particular part of the movie, there's a scene where he talks about citizenry.
Not
It's
my
like,
bad.
he's actually hitting on a number of very, very important points, right? So whoever wrote that, what they're probably doing is they're probably going back and seeing, they're probably going back and compiling a bunch of other people who've talked about this in movies or reading something where they're actually hitting those principles. Because it was actually built on something, right? That's why it has the impact that it does. And when we talk about citizenry, the ability to vote, politics, all that stuff has massive influence. And even in the fake worlds that we create, we at least try to mimic it to some degree. And so force here is something that is sometimes it's quite direct, sometimes it's more pliable, I guess is the way to look at it. But I start talking about in terms of those gray areas where the person you're dealing with doesn't know exactly what you have justifications to do. They don't know what you're authorized to do. And so they don't know exactly what to do as you're dealing with them. So long as you leave them that space where they don't know exactly what to do, it's like that gives you a little bit more control in that situation. And so you start dealing with how do you control people who might literally try to kill you in a split second, like fractions of a second, right? This is one good way. One of the big problems we have in policing and society itself is not understanding how these two things work, right? When I say that, it's okay. You have a bad situation. We'll say stress is high. Okay. You're coming into the situation as you add, we'll say, put it this way, plus you. Are you making things positive, neutral, negative? Are you escalating? Are you ineffective? Or are you maybe de-escalating would be one way of looking at it. Another way is just, are you giving control of the situation? Maybe it's de-escalating, maybe it's not.
Bless you.
Right? And so if I said escalation and force, you guys know exactly what I mean. You all had that kind of experiences at some point in your life. If you say you're in a stressful situation where someone's already probably trying to exact some level of control of the situation, and some forces already involved, you got to come in here and say, no, whatever's going on here needs to stop. And I need to see what exactly is going on. I'm gonna have to come in and take control of that situation. And if I'm gonna come in and tell somebody no right off the bat, people don't like no's.
No.
Yeah, I don't know why. They don't like no's. And so as soon as you start presenting them something that they don't like, well, these are the different directions they can go. Right? If there's already some resistance there, like you're having to wrestle with this person kind of thing, get over here. What's the likelihood that if you start applying force to that person and they're resisting, that it's going to increase? Right? As you start adding in more force to get control of the situation, you are quite literally adding in maybe more stress, more danger, something like that. So it's a careful balance of when to increase that potential because you're dealing with the overall situation. Not an easy thing to do, right? And so this is kind of the nature of how this works as you're dealing with someone, right? If we're really, really, really good, we don't have to worry about any of this. We get this, and we don't move beyond words. Words are nice in that capacity. Use words. People don't. People don't. And so what ends up happening is now you got someone who's not compliant, introducing danger to you. This is where I said last time that I think it was a Chinese principle. It's an old one. To be kind to your enemy is to be cruel to yourself. That one's I don't know if that goes back to China or if that's Japan. I can't remember. Yeah, every time you engage in this whole calculation, the more you look to keep it this way, the more danger you introduce to yourself. If I'm coming into a situation, let's say it's a domestic violence situation, and I'm seeing a husband and wife in the front yard throwing fists, I can come in and I can tackle one, let's say there's two people. We can tackle both of them, slap both in cuffs and make sure that their face has a mouthful of dirt as we're doing it, right? There will be very little danger if I do that extremely fast and I don't really care about the harm that happens to them. Very quick, no danger to me whatsoever. If I'm having to do that job, I don't want to have that danger. So that's one of those things, right? That is one way you have to save yourself sometimes, and that's not going to be a calculation. You always get to control because you're having to figure out, is this person just going to try to kill me right off the bat? That's a very, very real possibility, right? So now you got all that stuff going on. And it gets real difficult real fast. So how do we manage to figure out this issue and put it into a policy, a practice, and actually do it? That's the hard thing, turning the rubber into the road, right? We deal with this stuff in the daily. We have to figure out how to work in terms of, okay, here are the principles that underlie it and how they need to function properly for it to work. And then once we get that figured out, we go right back into it and then right back here again. It's difficult. And so with that comes complexity and all of everything that pops up as these types of events unfold. So we'll start out with last time we talked about the continuum. There are a lot of different ways that it's done and different ways that people classify, different ways I say departments classify. Whether an electrical weapon is more dangerous than a chemical one. Really hard to weigh, right? To some degree, what you're going to see is that you're going to see that reflected in policies. To some degree, you're going to see what kind of screw ups have happened in that specific location related to those things, because then they'll change policy directly about it to address it themselves, right? Keep that name in mind. We'll talk about that one. That's an older one, Eric Garner. So typically what they'll do is this. Continuum. Deadly. Right? That one's going to be the most severe. So hard, soft, verbal, and then presence is typically where you start on the low end. This would be 0. You're just there. People change their behaviors just to propel officers around. You know this already when you drive, right? Your cop car over there. How many people slow down? Yeah, right? Why do they slow down? I don't want the hassle around doing something that I don't want people to find out about. Okay, I'm having to talk with you. I already said, you're just seeing me changes your behavior. Now you're having to work with me on something. We're having to communicate. Soft, hard, deadly. These things you don't really, it doesn't really matter how they classify them. Typically what you start dealing with here are things like open hand versus closed hand, or impact versus impact, or would be something that seizing techniques, that kind of stuff, right? An open hand strike. Guess what? Why would you want to do that rather than punch?
Because it looks better on the papers.
It looks better on the papers. You can enforce a little bit more. That time thing I was telling you about, this conducts that force a lot faster than this does. However, if I use this, there's an extreme likelihood I'm going to break some of these or some of these. My hand stops working. I can no longer operate a gun. I can't wrestle with you. And now a lot of the stuff I need to do for seizing techniques does not work. Because instead of being able to use all of this, I now just have big joints and I can still do it, but I can't keep nearly as much control of you. It's not going to be fun. The likelihood that both of us end up injured is extremely high. This is soft nuance, right? If I'm having to take someone, put their hand behind their back, soft touches can keep you seized. A slight deviation of that goes from, okay, this is pain, to your joint is now out of the socket and you'll feel that pain for the rest of your life, right? You'll always have some mobility issues with that with your rotator cuff. Ask me how you know.
Doesn't the force have something to do with the crime too? It's like you don't want to use hard force on somebody that
Yes.
stop for speeding. I mean, unless
Yes.
escalate.
You can take the crime itself into account,
Right.
the person's disposition, every interaction that you've had with them, all of those things build up. It's the totality again. How do we manage this without that whole escalation, de-escalation? You're not adding anything to the equation. Why are you even there, right? How do we manage that? Usually what people will say is it's like a +1. Whatever level of force is presented, you are authorized to go up one step above. So you stop that escalation. If you're gonna start throwing punches at me and I throw a punch back at you, now we're fighting. Right? You throw a punch at me, I pull out a baton and I smack you across the knee, you're gonna drop. Right? If I do it right. That kind of thing.
So if somebody pulls a knife on you, you can pull a gun and that's possible.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah. And that's the danger with these weapons is like whenever we outlined all of that, all of those carry the risk of death, right? In this type of environment, within this room, which is more deadly, a firearm or a knife? It's going to depend on the type of weapon we're talking about, right? Then you got to get into specifics. You got handguns to rifles to shotguns to all that stuff. It's like, it doesn't really matter. We'll just say handgun kind of thing versus a knife. In here, I'd rather have a knife. Depending on how many people I'm dealing with, right? How many times this does not equal gun at all. Most time people get shot, they do not die. Right? That's just numbers. When you look at those who do die, most do not die instantly. Right? You shoot somebody, if you never hunted, which is one of the reasons why I like these kinds of areas, you get different experiences than we get in the city, more likely to be hunters, or at least have talked with people about it. You shoot the deer, you then track it most of the time. Right? People are the same way. When you get shot, you might die. It might not be for 5 minutes. It might not be for half an hour. It might not be for 3 days. Right? That's the way it goes. If it's in the instant, in the moment, you got all the adrenaline running. Let's say you get a central hit somewhere in here. You can drop a lung, you can nick their heart, they could be bleeding out internally. You still gonna be fighting with them for the next 3 minutes and they still might kill you. That's how that goes. It's not easy. And so those are just some of the pressures, and that's not even until when you're actively in it and dealing with yourself and involved stress responses. That's like training. That's the role of training in this. These are all perishable skills. This is one of the few areas where you'll really see that if you delve into it. If you're not actively working on these things, your ability to do it degrades over time. Why I wouldn't want to do it now, right? Not actively doing it, not gonna be as good. Never rise to the occasion, you fall back to your level of training. You always fall back to your level of training. You see someone rise to the occasion, what that means is they've been trained really, really well, and that's what they're keying into, and you don't see them work most of the time because that's how people work. No one operates at peak efficiency all the time.
Is there's no uniform training on that, like nationwide, it's like a local thing, isn't it, or?
We have so many different cultures, it varies so widely. Like, depending on your department, you might have people who, we're gonna focus more on, we're gonna have these training exercises, kinds of things, and these are the people we're inviting into training to. Whether it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people, or whether it's, whomever, like you'll see it, they'll come in waves kind of thing. There is a lot of training out there related to use of forces on the professional side. But still, most of the time, what they'll do is they'll refer you to, hey, this is what's going on at the federal level. Go consult your local because it's going to be different. That's Eric Garner. Okay. So here is where we are. Maybe some nuance in how it works. You've got your top and your bottom. You're just there all the way to you're using deadly force. Forces employed don't dictate what type of force you're using. That's more of an outcome. Stuff happens. Yeah. We'll talk about this one for a second, and we'll talk about thresholds, reasonableness, and how to use it. Okay. If you've been watching policing stuff for more than probably about 7 or 8 years now, this one was really big around 20, I'd say early 2010s, 2010, something like that. This is New York. If I said, I can't breathe is a common phrase you've heard. This is one of the guys who really got it going for our current time. New York, what it was is this guy, big guy. If you're looking at his height, he's probably about that tall. Yeah, he's in excess of 300 pounds. I'd say probably in excess of 4, because he's a brick. I mean, he's literally a brick of a person. His crime, I forget what got police originally called out there, but what they ended up saying is that he was selling cigarettes illegally. Small crime.
Smoking kills.
It does. So does selling it apparently.
Yeah.
What ends up happening with him is, as they're trying to arrest him, he doesn't want to be arrested. No, they're backing up. I'm a big guy. It's like, how many people is it going to take to hold me down or to, get control of me? If I'm that big, it's going to take a whole lot of people, right? Or a whole lot of force, one of the two. And so, New York itself, its policy on use of force forbade, completely prohibited a type of seizure, neck restraints, because of the danger associated with them. Okay. Basically, what you start talking about here is chokeholds and the ability for them to hurt and kill. In that encounter, if I show it to you, it is a hard one to watch, and maybe I'll show it to you at the end after we're done talking, because you can see exactly how hard it is to watch. Whenever you put on a chokehold, there's 2 types of chokeholds. Well, 2 effective ways to do a chokehold on somebody. Blood, breath. That's it. Most people are familiar with blood. That's what you see everybody do. That kind of thing. Get the tunnel vision, I'm out. That's blood. You stop the blood flow to your brain, you go unconscious. Breath is a different one. If I don't do this. So when in a chokehold, whenever you've done it before, you point your elbow straight down, right? Don't do that next time. If you do it this way, you bring it straight back, you seal the breath. They can't breathe. Don't do that. All right. It makes them do it. Don't do it because it's dangerous. In that case, the person who did that, what I would say probably happened is he did that, sealed off that person's breath. And most people panic when they can't suddenly breathe, right? Big guy, not in good shape, heart issues. You're putting stress on. What's the likelihood you're going to get heart failure? High. I did not see anything where they actually analyzed his neck, because what's really common is this is hard, but it's not very strong. If I pull real hard, it breaks. it breaks, you go from breathing normally through to breathing through what is smaller than a straw. You add in stress, you add in the size of the person, all those factors, you get death again. You died, right? You're in violation of the policy, someone died, and what ends up happening is nothing. Yeah, the system keeps going because that's what it does, right? You got a lot of people who are very, very upset about that. Why is it that nothing happens for that? An officer is obviously in violation of their own policies that caused quite directly a death that didn't need to happen. And nothing is done as a result. Why? That's the question. Okay.
That is a good question, because nobody ever got charged or anything for that.
Yeah, and they never talk about why, and that's a massive misunderstanding with this whole thing that people purposefully keep from you so you can't do the math.
Considering the crime, they escalated it quite a bit from where it should have been.
Yeah. Yeah, and so when we get into like the nature of how it developed over time, what you start moving into is some of the legal liabilities. We're not fully into legal liabilities, we're just in the use of force stuff. When we get to that end of the semester, what you start talking about is it's the 1983 and there's another one. Those are the statutes that dictate liabilities for violation of civil rights, and there's another one I can't remember. But that'll be in the federal
So
system.
what's the difference between that one? Do you remember the one on the subway that's just real recently? I don't remember. The guy was a Marine at one time.
Okay.
And they charged him with murdering the guy, but he did the same thing, didn't he?
It depends. I'd have to dig into that one.
Yeah,
So here's the math that went into that. Okay, so
probably because he wasn't a police officer, probably why he got charged, I'm guessing. But
probably,
yeah,
if he's not a police officer, there's so many more vulnerabilities there, and then no one else is on the hook. Right.
because he was the guy that the offender, the perpetrator, was
Mhm.
actually going around threatening people.
Mhm.
He was doing something that was more. than-
Okay, I know what you're talking about. This is
Yeah.
Subway shooter.
On the subway.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what you're
it was
talking
a
about.
shooter. I don't know. if it was a shooter.
There was one where it was a subway, there was a guy who was caught, and the person used force. I don't know if they had a shoot, maybe it wasn't a shooter. I don't remember, but
Subway
it
shooter
was.
is a different.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe makes sense. But that's what it is their area has so much issue with violence that if they send any signal that violence is acceptable to normal people will do that. You're already having issues where you're having standard, like normal citizens, stopping buses on bridges because they're seeing people coming they don't like and stopping it physically. Yes, the likelihood that escalates and goes wide in a generation is high.
Yes,
Yeah, that's not good.
yes.
The math behind it. First thing, you need to talk about force and the biggest division that there is in force. Deadly versus not. That's your big separation. That's what most of your cases will focus on, the split on that. If you're dealing with deadly force, that's one kind of line. Dealing with non-deadly force, you'll follow different kind of line of cases kind of thing. They overlap though, because they're dealing with force. When you deal with these elements at all, force at all, what amendment dictates use of force?
I would almost say the eighth, but that's more about the incarceration. That's
Yeah,
not-
that's punishments.
It's punishment.
Yeah, that's not, we're gonna do this for the benefit of
That's
people.
It can't
Yeah.
be cruel and unusual, because that may not be the eighth amendment.
Yeah, no, this one. Fourth amendment. Mhm. This first distinction, there's a very important seizure that's taken place. Life itself has been seized. Right? Sometimes when we make seizures, there are some things that damage incurs, and sometimes this one's the worst. There's no fixing it. Some things you can't undo. If I come and take your property, yeah, I'll probably give your property for however long it takes for us to run through the process. You can get it back if you want. Right? There's gonna be some loss associated with that too, whether it's your time away from it or its quality or whatever. Here, like, oh no, there's nothing to undo that. You've made a permanent decision that will rule that issue from your own out. That is a very, very difficult thing to consider. That one, Fourth Amendment.
So the line for deadly force is like a non-deadly force is probably a taser, right? They can
Well-
take somebody, but it could be deadly, but
What you start dealing with is you can move into that legal liabilities kind of thing.
Wouldn't that be based on like intentions, like I didn't know this guy had a pacemaker?
Yeah, so what you start running into are, okay, we'll go ahead and jump ahead a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So how you do that is like this. I'm trying to remember exactly what they were with the officer. Because there's a few different factors that you need to have. There is a duty, there was either omission or wrongful action, spelled omission. Or just omit, something's omitted. There is a harm incurred. There is a relationship between these, right? So there's a relationship there. And then originally, the officer's intent when they took the actions was a factor. And that's kind of what I'm getting at a little bit with some of this, right? So you've got everything associated with the actual legal suits, and you have everything's associated with the use of force, is why I started talking about it as two different lines. Because you got two different things going on, right? This one. Phrase is objective reasonableness. And so we'll talk about what it means to be objectively reasonable, right? We've already talked a little bit about what it is to be reasonable, and you're starting to deal with the average person encountering a situation, how they respond, how they process it, those types of things. Here, they've done it a little bit different. And so to get there, we'll talk about really, there's two big cases. There's a bunch of cases on the way. The two big ones you need to be intimately familiar with: Tennessee versus Garner, and then Graham versus Connor. Okay, so Tennessee versus Garner, I may have already talked to you about. I'll start giving some details if you heard before. Stop me. Nighttime burglary in Tennessee. Okay, here's what happened. Neighbor sees someone breaking into their house. They're breaking into their neighbor's house. Neighbor calls the police. Hey, my neighbor's house is being broken into. The police respond. And
An hour later with a notepad?
pretty close, but no, a little bit more proactive. They respond fairly quickly. Yeah, they show up.
They actually did something?
Yeah, so they show up. There's two officers on the scene, both of them armed. They can tell the house. They can't really see anything going on in there, but yeah, it's obviously been broken into. Suspect still appears to be inside the house.
Man, these burglars suck.
Yeah, well, I mean, you'll find out why if you read the whole case, why the person sucks so bad. They were new, kind of thing.
First day on the job.
Kind of. Okay, start getting people.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
I'm getting off. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's my bad. No, my bad.
No, that's
I'm
fine.
surprised as they actually did something, but yeah,
Yeah.
my bad.
Well, what ends up happening is they show up. Okay, there's something going on in this house. It's nighttime. What's the likelihood that there's someone else in the house? Are we dealing with a burglary or a robbery? Are we dealing with kidnapping? What the hell's going on here? There's a lot of stuff that you could figure out could be happening if you were entering into that situation, you yourself, right? So what they did is, okay, we're gonna have to go in and see what's going on. I'm gonna go in through the front, you go around back. Right? Standard. I'm gonna flush that person out, you're gonna catch him.
Yeah.
I go in through the front door, and yeah, as soon as the guy goes into the front door, burglar's out the back. At this point in time, if you had committed a felony, you are completely justified with using deadly force to stop a
was this?
fleeing suspect. If you're a police officer in the 1970s.
Oh, 7. Okay,
So this is 1970.
I thought you said 8.
Garner was 1970. I don't remember. I want to say 3, but I can't remember. So that's what ends up happening is suspect is flushed out the back. Stop right there.
Yeah.
Okay. He's already running. So what's he do is he jumps up onto the fence and starts scaling. Officer pulls out the weapon, the sidearm, proceeds to send off a round to the back of the guy's skull. He drops. Right? Turns out what he had stolen, the house was completely empty. What he had stolen was a purse that held, I think, $10. $10, right? With the way the statutes are written and all the factors.
Cheap life.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, so you got all of the reasoning that's gonna go into it in the front end, everything that an officer could possibly consider going into it to make all the best decisions they could, if they are inclined to be the best officer they can be, right? You look at it that way and you look at, okay, here's what actually ends up happening, even in the best of situations or the worst. It can still be massively bad, so. Nighttime burglary in that state was written to, since it's at the nighttime, the wife gets someone's home, is a felony. Since this person is a fleeing felon, you are justified in shooting and killing them, right? You have that legal justification. Is it right? Most people look at that and say there was no actual danger here. The person was running, and the most damage that they'd actually caused was and the breaking and entering and the taking of $10. So you're talking about what amount of money is that life ultimately worth? We just valued it less than what, $100 in that time frame? Not cool.
Yeah, so
Not
talk
cool.
about bargain bin.
Yeah, and so it's like at that point in time, we start revising our use of force because to get all the way up to the most severe, all you need to do is commit a felony and flee. Right? As a result, we can no longer shoot someone exact deadly force for fleeing suspects unless there are specific calls for it. There's that danger to you, that danger to people, something, emergency, that kind of thing. However, other effect, how much more frequent are flights? Suspects fleeing the scene, suspects jumping in the car, rumping on the gas and taking off as dangerous as they can to entire society, right? They do that because now what we do is we do a different calculation, as in we're justified to stop you. Now we have to do the calculations. How much danger is this person presenting? Is it enough danger to where I'm justified with the action? Or is it so much danger they're putting the entire public at risk and now I'm making it worse because they'll hold me responsible? Now we see why fleeing is so hot, right? That's one of those things.
So, if you don't mind me asking,
Mhm.
you said there was a reason that this burglar was so bad on his first night at the job?
He's young. Can't remember how young. I want to say minor. The number 14 stands out in my head, but I want to go back and look at the case. Right? So now you're talking about
Oh.
potentially killing a kid over $10. And it's like, yeah, that's really, really
Oh.
one of those things that
oh,
society
that-
has to rebalance a little bit after that one. That's what that case did.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's one, and that's deadly force. Now you start getting into the non-deadly force. So this is the DNB Garner. Garner, which is funny because not because of that, because it's the same name, it's just coincidence. I mean,
World.
yeah, the world doesn't exactly repeat itself, but my goodness, there are some,
Economics of determinism.
yeah, there are some things that are really interesting. So the other one here is for non-deadly force. You look at Graham v. Connor. That one is a 1983 case where it's a civil rights deprivation. That comes very, very much in handy. How you do this math? You do this math in policing. You guys ever read anything like Sherlock Holmes or any detective stories, that kind of stuff? You do that same kind of math. It's actually the same kind of math we do in stats. We just go to about it a different way. Or if you're doing research, it's the same stuff. You're doing it within your class. You're taking these logical things and you're putting them together. That's all the same kind of thing. Here, how they do it. It's like they started dealing with these types of things to see if an officer was responsible for their actions. Originally, the officer's intent was a factor and could be used in determining whether or not force was excessive or wasn't. Right? What is the purpose that this specific officer had in using force? Okay, something to consider. Let me tell you about this story and we'll come back to that. So Graham versus Connor is an interesting story because what it starts out with is a diabetic. Right? It's a friend and his diabetic friend. Yeah. Driver, the friend is the passenger who's diabetic. I think that's who was driving. At any rate. Person starts having blood sugar crash. I need sugar immediately. Okay. They drive fairly fast to a gas station. At which point in time, person hops out, runs into the gas station, sees a long line of people. Friend's having a diabetic issue, right? That's an emergency. Okay. there's 20 people in line. This is gonna take me 30 minutes. And at that point in time, that person will probably need to be in the hospital already. And they need sugar immediately. I'm gonna turn my ass around, hop back in my car, and fast as I can to the next place where I can get sugar. That's what the person did. As they're driving, there just so happened to be an officer who saw vehicle fly into the parking lot, person hop out, run in. They're in there less than 2 minutes, run back out and floor it. What does that look like?
Good service.
Yeah, the best of service, the free kind,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So he does what any officer would. Initiate a stop. Pulls the person over. As the officer comes up, approaches the vehicle, starts talking to the driver tells him what's going on. Okay, that sounds like a reasonable story. Looks like I've been doing this for a few years. What's the likelihood someone's lying to me about something? Extremely high. People lie all the time. One of the most irritating things. Don't lie.
Yeah.
And in this area, it's one of those things that we started talking about that, and we will talk about that. When we start talking about some of the immunity stuff. Don't lie in any way, shape, or form, and even to the point at which you need to see if someone can look at your actions or your words and so in twist your own intent in that way. That's good advice for you in all careers moving forward. So I don't believe you. Okay, what other evidence is going to take place to support that? As I'm dealing with this person, their passenger starts acting erratic. Because again, diabetics. If you're familiar with how diabetics can act whenever they're having diabetic sugar issues, anywhere from massive intoxication to they're dying kind of thing. It's like you have a wide range of behaviors there and unpredictability all throughout. Anytime you deal with unpredictability in this realm as a police officer, usually what that means is there's something dangerous afoot. And so you're going to be keyed up to begin with. As they're having difficulties with this person, they're having verbal and all this stuff's actually recorded in the we're going to talk about. If you read the actual case itself, they'll tell you some of the language that was used between. And it's not the most flowery, I'll tell you that. Yeah. And so officers under the impression this person's actually under the influence that they just tried to rob that vehicle. And now this person's resisting arrest. Because I told them to get back and they're not listening. And I have to put them under arrest. As I'm doing so, I've got one person telling me it's a diabetic issue. I've got all the evidence that lead me to the conclusion that I think that this person is actually under the influence and committed criminal activity, and I need to have someone else go out and check. So I'm dealing with this while I have another person go out and check, see if there was an actual crime taking place. Right? In dealing with this person who's resisting arrest, they're not really going to be fully aware of what's going on. There's going to be some injuries that take place. In the course of that, right, you have a duty. Is there some omission or violation? What kind of harm was produced? This person had a broken foot. What was it? I forget what kind of bruising, ruptured eardrum. It's a ruptured eardrum. That's kind of what surprised me.
Yeah, it's like that can lead to like total deafness.
Well, it's not just that. There are no strikes in this person's head. The only thing that was reported was yelling. How close were you to that ear and how loud were you yelling? How much force are you using? What kind of signals are you sending here and how are you interacting with this person, right? You have all the evidence that gives you a very reasonable justification for everything that you're seeing. And at the same time, I see it differently. And how do I reconcile the two? I need to be objective and act in a reasonable way. How they managed to do it in this case is we're no longer going to consider the officer's intentions at all and look at it as if there was an officer who knows nothing, enters into this situation. How would they reasonably respond? And in most situations, if you're having to control someone, a situation where there is that potential danger, it is very reasonable to put that person into cuffs. And if they resist arrest, it's very reasonable for there to be injuries that take place, right? However, you don't consider that officer's intent. And that one, the intent there's a strong argument the officer was going well beyond what they should have been doing. Right? You have a reason here that you should be considering. You should have some consideration for that as you're taking those actions. But the way we weigh it there is just make sure it's reasonable, that kind of thing. That's the best we can do because if you get it much more than that, you open yourself up to litigation on unprecedented levels that will stop the entire system. We get a lot of those already. When we get to liability stuff, we'll talk about that. And yeah, it becomes non-functional. That's how they resolved it. As a result, in cases like Eric Garner, you violated policy. you violated, you're gonna get a written, a write-up in your written record kind of thing. That's about the extent of it. You violated policy. When they sat and they looked at it, okay, you have a guy who is 400 pounds plus, who's probably in excess of 6'5". I don't remember his exact sizes, but he's a giant compared to most people. Is it reasonable that if that person is resisting arrest for an officer to use a chokehold, and remember, we're dealing at the federal level across the entire country when we determine what the average officer will do, how reasonable is it to use a chokehold and how effective is it? It's very effective. It's very reasonable. And it also, to some degree, limits some of the danger in that situation because I have direct control over that person. Very, very reasonable things. In its application, though, danger. You can kill someone quite easily. Just playing around with your friends, you can do this. Right? Don't play with it unless you do. With that, we'll pick up with this next class. You guys feel like you learned some stuff?
Yes, never trust diabetics.
Yes, they've got good reasons to get away with stuff.
Yeah,
No, I'm just kidding.
addicts, you're not you when you're hungry.
That's true. That's true. Hangry exists. Everyone's like that. All right, well, we'll pick
Don't
up.
steal $10 from purses.
Yes, don't, especially if it's the 1970s.
Yes.
But yeah, so it's like, here's deadly force, deadly versus non-deadly. When we get beyond it, the practices, they'll typically outline it in terms of continuum. When you get there and say you're actually in the scenario of doing it, it's a lot different. And then this whole thing is well after the fact, because you'll get a jury of people and all the lawyers involved, they'll get years to look at it while you had fractions of a second. So that's all of the joys of force in policing. We'll continue this conversation next
Graham
month.
v. Connor, was that when he was suing the police? Probably.
Yeah, he was suing the individual
State.
officer. Yeah,
You see the state or the federal, you ask for, it's usually, but when it's two people, usually they're suing some
Mhm.
individual.
well, it's because it went all the way to the Supreme Court. That what deal with it at the federal level. It started out as a state police officer thing.
Yeah, I see society changing a lot the last between seven.
Yes. Oh my goodness, there's been so many changes. Some are good, some are bad. And
That's why they changed a lot of this stuff.
yeah, and so you get to see the effects of the changes we made to fix yesteryear's issues, present new ones this year, and we've got new ones coming.
I don't think these change, I don't think changes the government were meant to fix anyone's issues except for the rich, except for the ones who can afford to vote.
Well, I mean, there's whole lines of theories devoted to that in our field. I mean, that, and you really get to, and there's some value and some validity to that. But